Are you seeing the share?
I can see the intro screen that says 4B Antennas and Feedlines. Start recording.
Okay. I'm seeing a black screen.
Something that happened the last time was that it went from this, which is I can see all the slides, like if I were the presenter, and stuff on the right-hand side, layouts and whatnot. And last time it went to a full screen for the presentation.
All right.
I wish I could help you. Maybe you
Yeah.
share it? Did you share it?
Well, I did. And
Go to slideshow, maybe? I'm just guessing. I don't know.
oh, maybe that'll work. It says I'm sharing. Let's see what happens.
There
All
you
right.
go.
Okay, are we good?
Looks good.
Feed lines?
Feed lines and connectors, types.
Okay, so that's how we connect up to an antenna. We call it a feed line because it's feeding the signal between your transceiver and the antenna. We typically use coaxial cable. Most the coaxial cable that we'll use for amateur radio is 50 ohm impedance. We'll talk about impedance a little bit more. Sometimes we'll use ladder line or twin lead, or in some cases open wire, although those three are not very common anymore. If you remember twin lead, you probably saw it back in the old days when you had a TV antenna and that little like half-inch brown antenna lead going to it. We called that twin lead. But today, it's almost always coaxial cable. It's very easy to use. Doesn't really take special tools, although you need it with most of the connectors. If you're making them cables yourself, you need a crimping tool. Here's some pictures. This is on the left showing how a typical coaxial cable is constructed. And there's a center conductor. It may be solid or stranded. If it's stranded, it means that it's more flexible. The solid ones are kind of hard to work with. You can't bend them in a very sharp radius. It'll be surrounded with some form of dielectric. In a lot of cases, it's a polyethylene. In some cases, it's a foam insulation. And then that's surrounded with a shield, which on most of the coaxes today, it will be aluminum foil covered with a copper wire braid and then some sort of plastic jacket. And in most cases, it's some plastic that's ultraviolet resistant. It doesn't mean it'll last forever because the ultraviolet will attack that outer shield and eventually cause it to crack and then allow water in, which kind of messes up the cable. The two in the middle, the top one is what we call ladder line, and it actually has those holes cut in it basically to lower the wind resistance. And then below it is the twin lead, like you would use for your stereo or FM stereo system in the old days, or TV. Over on the right is what we call hard line. It's like coax, except the outer shield or shell is a usually corrugated copper, could be aluminum. It's very stiff. It has a center conductor. It may have a dielectric of foam. In some cases, it's actually air, and there's a little plastic kind of a spiral that keeps the center conductor centered in the tube. It does take special tools to work with it and put connectors on. This is a picture of what we call open line, where it's just two wires separated with some plastic insulators. So one of the most important characteristics that we care about on feed lines is its impedance, or its characteristic impedance. And the characteristic impedance is defined as what you would see looking into an infinite length of that transmission line, whether it's shorted or open or terminated. If it's infinitely long, you'll see its characteristic impedance. Most amateur radio is going to use 50 ohms. 75 is what you would see for TV, like cable TV. Broadband cables are usually 75 ohms. And impedance is the opposition of AC current flow, as opposed to resistance, which is the opposition to current flow. So impedance is frequency dependent, but we still measure it in ohms. So the formula for impedance is the resistance, or the real part, plus the inductive and the capacitive reactances. So the J2 pi FL is the inductive reactance, and the J over 2 pi FC is the capacitive reactance. And like I said, when we were at resonance, those two reactances cancel out, so the impedance is just equal to R. So if we terminate a transmission line in its characteristic impedance, in other words, we put a 50 ohm load at one end and we connect our transmitter to the other end, it's going to look like a perfect match, and we're going to transmit all the power into that load, whether it's a dummy load or an actual antenna. So why is coaxial cable the most common feed line for amateur radio antenna systems?
Alpha.
What is impedance?
Alpha. But I don't really know.
Well, that's an important one.
Well, I guessed right.
As long as you keep guessing right. What is the unit of impedance?
The ohm.
Very good. Okay. Like I said, most amateur radio transmitters have an output impedance of 50 ohms, and we try to get antennas close to 50 ohms, so we have a match. You'll find RG58, which is just the nomenclature for a quarter-inch 50 ohm coaxial cable, and RG213 which is essentially a half-inch diameter 50 ohm cable. And there's variations of those, but those are what you used to find most often. They're both 50 ohms. The 50 RG58.
Those are names for coax that you'd go into the store and say, "I need some RG58."
Yep.
Yeah.
In fact, I went to the store yesterday and bought 100 feet of DRF 400 and 50 feet of LMR 240.
Uh-huh.
The two columns that are starred are that way because those are the ones that they decided to use for the questions. But you can see in the table, there's a bunch of different types of coax, and it shows the amount of loss per 100 feet at different frequencies. And if you notice, as the frequency goes up, the loss goes up. And in the case of RG58, where you get up to 2400 megahertz, the loss is 24.8 dB, where in the RG213 it's only 12. So the loss is twice as great, pretty much over the whole frequency range there between those two, which is the really important thing you need to get from this slide. You can see that some of the other cables, like the LMR 400, which is one of the better ones outside of hardline, is going to have the lowest loss. It also costs the most, about $2 a foot. So what's the most common impedance of coaxial cables used in amateur radio?
Bravo.
What happens as the frequency of a signal in coaxial cable is increased? Remember, we talked about those two columns.
I know, but so I think it's delta.
What is the electrical difference between RG58 and RG213 coaxial cable?
Charlie.
Charlie.
I'm a good guesser, huh?
So depending on the frequency, RG58 would probably be fine for working down at 80 meters. Because if you went back to the chart and looked at that frequency, which is going to be 3 megahertz, your loss is not going to be very much. It'd still be better to use the 213, but not that big a difference. And, 213 is a little harder to work with and it costs a little more. But if you're going to operate up at, say, 440 megahertz with 50 feet of RG58, you're going to have a loss, so you'd probably want to use the RG213 or one of the others, but the FCC questions only care about RG58 and 213. Typically, because hardline coaxial cable is very expensive, you normally see it used on repeaters to feed the antenna, usually up on top of a tall building or tower, uh, because you're operating at VHF and UHF, so you want the lowest loss. And you also want to, in a lot of cases, get the repeater itself mounted as high. A lot of times, if you're using a building, they'll have some kind of maybe equipment room up on the roof where repeaters, the actual transmit receive repeater is physically mounted, and then use hardline going up to an antenna that's higher up on the roof. So which of the following types of feed line has the lowest loss at VHF and UHF?
Charlie.
Okay, so there's a lot of things that cause loss. The main one is water intrusion, where you have breaks in the outer coating, usually due to ultraviolet, but it could just be from abrasion, gets stepped on, something, which allows water to get into the braid and into the dielectric. Especially if it's foam dielectric, the water will kind of saturate the foam. So you'll wind up getting a very high SWR. You get a lot of power reflected back. Can actually cause heating in the cable, which will at some point damage the cable if you get enough heat. Connectors themselves will give you a little bit of loss.
What is SWR?
Standing wave ratio, where you're getting a reflected signal back. So in other words, you put 100 watts out, you say you're getting 5 watts back. So you're really only getting 95 watts to the antenna. So that 5 watts is coming back down the cable back to your transmitter. And it adds and subtracts to the signal going out, so you can get some increased voltages, which is what we call the standing wave ratio.
Okay.
Connectors have a little loss and a little mismatch. They're not perfect. So the more connectors you have, the more loss and more mismatches, particularly if connectors are loose, and they can kind of work loose. They really need to be tight. And if they are coming loose, they can also cause what we call intermodulation distortion, which I'll talk about more later, but it's just one of the things that can happen with loose connectors. Water being the biggest problem. Which of the following is a source of loss in coaxial feed line?
Delta. I would say delta.
Very good. Yeah, I probably should have had this one earlier in the question because it's all the same stuff we talked about. Even using hardline, you have to worry about moisture. So since those connections are all soldered or welded, you still have to be sure that there's no leaks so it can get moisture inside the hardline. Which of the following causes failure of coaxial cables?
Well, I'd get alpha because that's the only thing we talked about.
That's right. These other three are all phony.
Phony things? Solder flux, no such thing?
Well, yeah, there's solder flux. contamination, but I'm not sure how you'd get that in a coaxial cable. Fluctuating of the transmitter output power is not going to cause the cable to fail. And 100% duty cycle isn't going to affect it unless you're running more power than the cable is actually rated for. Like if you were putting 1500 watts into an RG58, it isn't the duty cycle that's going to get you. It's just that you're putting more power in than it's rated for. Why should the outer jacket of coaxial cable be resistant to ultraviolet light?
Delta.
Yeah, ultraviolet's bad stuff and good. It causes sunburns, but it also ionizes the ionosphere. What is the disadvantage of air core coaxial cable when compared to foam or dielectric types?
I know you talked about this, but I don't remember, so I'm going to say Charlie.
Very good.
A good guesser.
Okay, so you need to remember impedance is the opposition to alternating current flow. That's different than resistance, which is opposition to any kind of current flow. We measure them both in ohms. 50 ohms is the most common impedance for feed lines. Loss of feed lines increase with frequency. It doesn't matter what the cable is. The loss goes up the higher the frequency. Some cable has less loss than others. Like the air insulated hardline is basically the lowest loss, most expensive, hardest to deal with. But you don't get something for nothing.
So I need some help here. On this first bullet, you said impedance is opposition to alternating current flow, which I'm good with that, and the units. And then we go on and talk about feed lines and most common impedance in the context of coax, which is not alternating current.
Oh yeah, you're sending an alternating current signal. That's an RF signal.
This is in, I bet, one of those other lessons that I missed. So a radio is an alternating current.
Right.
Okay. Well,
That's the only way you can. That's the only way you can make the antenna radiate. In the video, you didn't see. But I will try to send you that link.
And I'm going to go do the other videos too, because I have a feeling that there would be some help there for me. Okay, we're good. Thank you.
Where? Who's moving things around?